The pattern was subtle at first, but as more positions went dark, it became clear that something was systematically working its way through their defensive network. Zielmoth assembled a reconnaissance team to investigate the missing outposts. Led a reconnaissance flight to investigate. What I found, he shuddered, his compound eyes reflecting the chamber's harsh lights. The outposts were intact. No battle damage, no signs of forced entry. But the crews were gone, all of them. Weapons still in their racks, meals half-finished on tables, duty logs still recording normal status reports right up until they stopped. The investigation team followed traces in the ice, footprints that led away from the abandoned positions and disappeared into crevasses that their sensors said were solid rock. When they used deep penetration scanners, they found something that changed everything. Human soldiers had been living beneath the ice, carving tunnel networks with their bare hands and primitive tools, Zielmoth continued. Miles of tunnels connecting chambers, supply depots, living quarters. They had built an entire underground city in 2 months, using nothing but basic engineering equipment and incredible determination. The humans had done more than just survive in the frozen wasteland. They had studied their enemies with scientific precision. Every defensive position had been observed and analyzed. Every patrol route had been memorized. Every shift change had been recorded. The humans emerged from their ice tunnels during the worst storms, when Vakhtari sensors were blind and their guards were focused on staying warm. They had studied our defensive patterns, learned our shift rotations, and emerged during storm cycles when our sensors were blind. But that wasn't the terrifying part. The terrifying part was how quickly they adapted. Commander He-Jin's troops moved through Vakhtari territory like ghosts, striking supply convoys and communication relays with surgical precision. They never held ground, never tried to establish permanent positions. Instead, they hit and vanished, always staying one step ahead of reinforcements. He-Jin's troops had adapted. They moved through our territory like shadows, striking supply convoys and communication relays. When we finally cornered a group of them in Sector 7, they fought with weapons made from our own fallen equipment. They had been studying us, learning from every skirmish. When the Vakhtari forces finally managed to corner a human squad in the industrial sector, they discovered that the humans had been collecting damaged Vakhtari equipment from every attack. Weapons, armor, communication devices, vehicles, everything had been stripped down, studied, and rebuilt into hybrid human Vakhtari technology that was somehow more effective than either species' original designs. The human soldiers fought with modified Vakhtari energy rifles that had been recalibrated for human physiology. They wore improvised armor that combined Vakhtari protection with human mobility. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to understand Vakhtari tactical doctrine better than many Vakhtari commanders. The siege ended when they reached our command bunker, Zielmoth said, his voice barely audible. Not through superior firepower, but through persistence. While we focused on their main force, thinking we had finally located their primary assault, Engineer Boram and her team had spent weeks digging through solid rock. The humans had identified the one weakness in Korath Prime's defenses that no previous enemy had ever found. The command bunker was built into the planet's bedrock, surrounded by layers of armor and shielding that could withstand orbital bombardment. But Boram had realized that the bunker's power came from geothermal generators deep underground. They emerged directly beneath our strategic center and offered terms, Zielmoth continued. Surrender the planet, or watch it burn as they activated the thermal charges they had placed in our reactor cores. The humans had spent weeks tunneling through solid rock, following the geothermal conduits that powered the base. They had placed explosives not to destroy the bunker, but to trigger a controlled meltdown of the planetary power grid. If detonated, the charges would have turned Korath Prime's own energy system into a planet-killing weapon. We surrendered, Zielmoth admitted, his compound eyes closing in shame. Not because we couldn't win, but because we realized that defeating humans wasn't about destroying their bodies. It was about breaking their will. And their will seemed unbreakable. The recorder's sensors detected something else in Zielmoth's voice, not just fear but a grudging respect that seemed to disturb him more than the terror. The humans had accomplished something that 8 centuries of galactic warfare had never achieved. They had made the Vakhtari doubt their own invincibility. After the humiliation at Korath Prime, Zealmoth's breathing apparatus wheezed like a broken engine as he recalled what came next. The sound filled the detention chamber with mechanical gasps that seemed to mirror his psychological state. High Command reassigned me to deep space operations, he continued, his compound eyes staring into the void of memory. They said planetary warfare was too unpredictable with humans involved. We thought the endless vacuum of space would be safer, more controllable. Out there, it was just ship against ship, technology against technology. We were wrong, dead wrong. The Aid Vakhtari Empire's deep space patrol fleets were their pride and joy. Massive vessels designed for long-range operations, equipped with the most advanced sensors in the galaxy. They could detect a single fighter craft from 3 star systems away, track energy signatures through hyperspace, and coordinate attacks. Across light years of distance, Zealmoth commanded a patrol fleet of 37 vessels, ranging from massive battle cruisers to swift reconnaissance ships. They had been hunting human forces for 6 months without a single contact. The humans seemed to have vanished from their sector entirely. My patrol fleet encountered what appeared to be a derelict human convoy near the Omega Nebula, Zealmoth said, his claws unconsciously scratching patterns on the metal table. 18 ships, all different classes. Some were clearly military vessels. Others looked like converted cargo haulers or passenger transports. All of them were dead in space. The Omega Nebula was a massive cloud of ionized gas and stellar debris that stretched across several light years. It was a graveyard of dead stars and broken planets, where sensor readings became unreliable and communication was nearly impossible. Ships that entered the nebula often emerged weeks later, with their crews driven mad by the isolation and strange radiation effects. No life signs, no energy readings, no response to our hails, Zealmoth continued. The ships appeared to have been drifting for weeks, maybe months. Hull breaches suggested they had been in some kind of battle. Debris fields around them contained the wreckage of what looked like Vakhtari vessels. Standard salvage protocols were clear. Derelict enemy vessels were to be boarded and searched for intelligence. Any technology or information that could provide strategic advantage was to be secured and analyzed. It was routine, something Vakhtari forces had done thousands of times across dozens of campaigns. Standard salvage protocols suggested boarding for intelligence gathering, Zealmoth whispered. It was the perfect trap. So perfect that even now, knowing what I know, I'm not sure I would have done anything differently. The boarding operation began at 800 ship time. 12 boarding parties, each consisting of 20 elite Vakhtari Marines, launched from the patrol fleet in heavily armored shuttles. Their mission was simple: secure the derelict vessels, search for survivors, and recover any useful intelligence or technology. The first teams to board reported exactly what the sensors had indicated. Dead ships, cold and airless, with no signs of recent occupation. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows through empty corridors. Personal belongings were scattered as if the crews had abandoned ship in a hurry. As soon as our boarding parties were aboard, the dead ships came alive, Zealmoth said, his voice growing hollow. Every system that had shown no power signatures suddenly blazed with activity. Engines that had been cold for weeks roared to life. Weapons that had appeared damaged began charging. The truth hit the Vakhtari forces like a physical blow. The human ships hadn't been derelict at all. They had been playing dead, running on minimal power using advanced hibernation technology to mask their life signs. Pilot Kyung-ho and his crews had been waiting in stasis pods for weeks, conserving power and oxygen, betting that Vakhtari curiosity would bring them exactly the opportunity they needed. Pilot Kyung-ho and his crew had been waiting in stasis pods conserving power and oxygen for weeks, Zealmoth continued. They had deliberately allowed us to capture them, not just allowed, engineered it. Every detail of their apparent defeat had been carefully staged. But the humans' plan went far beyond simple deception. While the Vakhtari boarding parties were searching the seemingly abandoned vessels, human technical teams were moving through the boarding tubes in the opposite direction. They wore captured Vakhtari environmental suits and moved with the confidence of people who belonged there. While we searched their ships, they accessed our vessels through the boarding tubes, Zealmoth said, his breathing becoming more labored. Human technician Subin had somehow learned our computer systems. Not just learned them, mastered them completely. She knew our protocols better than our own technicians. Subin and her team moved through the Vakthari ships like ghosts. They accessed computer terminals, uploaded custom-designed viruses, and modified critical systems. The viruses weren't crude programs designed to destroy. They were sophisticated pieces of code that learned and adapted, turning the Vakthari ships' own advanced systems against them. She and her team uploaded viruses that turned our own ships against us, Zielmoth whispered. Our navigation computers began reporting false positions. Our weapon systems locked onto our own vessels. Our communication arrays started broadcasting. Human propaganda instead of tactical data. But Pilot Kyung-ho had something even more devastating planned. He had studied Vakthari emergency procedures and found a weakness that no previous enemy had ever exploited. Kyung-ho did something that still haunts my dreams, Zielmoth said, his compound eyes reflecting the chamber's lights like fractured mirrors. Instead of simply disabling our fleet, he activated our emergency protocols simultaneously across all vessels. Every ship began evacuation procedures at once. Emergency evacuation protocols were designed to save lives during catastrophic system failures. When activated, they triggered automated sequences that sealed bulkheads, activated emergency beacons, and prepared escape pods for immediate launch. The protocols were hardwired into every system, impossible to override once initiated. Chaos. Complete chaos, Zielmoth continued. Panic spread through our fleet like wildfire. Emergency klaxons blared from every ship. Our crews, trained to respond instantly to evacuation orders, fled to escape pods, while humans systematically captured each vessel. The Vakthari crews found themselves in an impossible situation. Their own ships were telling them to evacuate immediately, while enemy forces were somehow in control of their vessels. Training and instinct took over, and thousands of experienced space marines abandoned their posts and fled to the escape pods. When the battle ended, we found ourselves prisoners aboard our own ships, Zielmoth said, his voice barely audible. 18 human vessels had captured 37 Vakthari warships without firing a single shot. We were prisoners in our own fleet. What happened next defied everything Zielmoth thought he knew about warfare. Pilot Kyung-ho personally visited each captured vessel, not as a conqueror, but almost like a concerned neighbor checking on friends after a disaster. Kyung-ho approached me in the brig, and I expected execution, Zielmoth continued. Instead, he offered medical supplies for my wounded crew and asked about our families back home. Not as interrogation, but as if he genuinely cared about our welfare. The human pilot explained that the captured Vakthari crews would be released in neutral space with enough fuel and supplies to reach home safely. Their ships would be returned undamaged, except for the removal of certain weapon systems and military intelligence. I asked him why, Zielmoth said. Why spare us? Why return our ships? Why show mercy to enemies who had shown none to his people? Kyung-ho's answer was simple and terrifying in its implications. Dead enemies teach no lessons. Living ones spread fear. I realized then that humans don't fight wars. They conduct psychological operations where warfare is just one tool, Zielmoth concluded. Every battle, every encounter, every victory was designed not just to defeat us, but to break our confidence in our own superiority. They wanted us alive, scared, and talking about what they could do. The tribunal recorder processed this information, its sensors detecting the profound psychological trauma in Zielmoth's biometric readings. The alien commander had encountered something that challenged everything his species believed about conflict, power, and survival. The humans weren't just winning battles, they were rewriting the rules of war itself. After the Ghost Fleet disaster, Zielmoth was given one final command, one last chance to prove that the Vakthari Empire could stand against the human threat. His compound eyes fixed on a point beyond the chamber walls as he recalled the memory that would haunt him forever. My final command was at the Zerion defense platform, he whispered, his voice carrying the weight of absolute defeat. It was meant to be impregnable, a fortress in space where we could make our final stand against the human advance. The Zerion defense platform was the crown jewel of Vakthari military engineering. Built over 50 years, it was more than just a space station. It was a mobile fortress the size of a small moon. The platform housed 2 million personnel, from elite marines to civilian engineers. Its main cannon could punch through a planet's crust from orbit, and its shield generators were powerful enough to deflect the energy output of a small star. The platform sat at the heart of the Xerion system, surrounded by a defensive fleet of 800 warships. Asteroid fields had been converted into automated weapons platforms. The entire system was a death trap designed to stop any fleet foolish enough to challenge Vakthari supremacy. The human assault fleet arrived commanded by Admiral Tae Young. Zielmoth continued, his breathing apparatus wheezing with each word. 200 ships against our super fortress and its defensive fleet. We laughed when our sensors first detected them. 200 ships against our fortress and 800 defenders. It seemed like another desperate human gesture. But Admiral Tae Young didn't behave like previous human commanders. Instead of launching an immediate assault or attempting to negotiate, his fleet took position just outside the system's edge and began what appeared to be routine patrol operations. For 3 days they simply waited, conducting what looked like standard fleet exercises. For 72 hours they probed our defenses, testing our responses, Zielmoth said. Not with full attacks, but with single ships, small squadrons, even individual fighters. They would approach our perimeter, force us to respond, then retreat before we could engage them properly. Each probe taught the humans something new about the Xerion defenses. They learned the rotation schedules of the patrol fleets. They mapped the firing arcs of the automated weapons platforms. They identified the shield generators and calculated the power grid that kept the entire system operational. We repelled every attack, destroyed dozens of their vessels. We thought we were winning, Zielmoth admitted. Our kill ratio was incredible. For every Vakthari ship damaged, we destroyed 5 human vessels. Our crews celebrated each victory, convinced that we were bleeding the human fleet dry. But the humans weren't trying to win through superior firepower. They were conducting an experiment, testing the limits of Vakthari defensive systems. Every ship they lost provided data about weapon effectiveness, shield strength, and response times. They were learning how to kill a fortress. Then the pattern changed, Zielmoth said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. So instead of probing attacks, they began direct assaults, but not against our weakest points, against our strongest ones. Human pilot Seung Woo led the final assault wave. His squadron consisted of 30 fighters, all showing battle damage from previous engagements. Several were leaking atmosphere, others had weapons systems offline. By any rational measure, they should have returned to their carrier for repairs. Human pilot Seung Woo led a squadron of damaged fighters directly at our main cannon, Zielmoth continued. The biggest, most heavily defended weapon on the platform. They weren't trying to escape. They were aiming straight for our most protected target. The main cannon was surrounded by layers of shields, point defense systems, and armor plating. No fighter-sized vessel should have been able to penetrate those defenses, let alone damage the weapon itself. The Vakthari defenders watched in confusion as the damaged human fighters approached what appeared to be certain death. One by one, his pilots sacrificed themselves, each impact weakening our shields, Zielmoth said. But these weren't random suicide attacks. Each fighter struck a specific point, creating tiny fractures in our defensive grid. They had calculated exactly where and how to hit us. The pattern became clear as fighter after fighter slammed into the cannon's defenses. The humans had identified a harmonic frequency in the shield generators. Each impact was timed perfectly to create resonance waves that amplified with each successive strike. When Seung Woo's fighter struck the cannon array, it created a resonance cascade, Zielmoth whispered. Our own defensive systems turned against the station. The shields that were supposed to protect us began tearing the platform apart from the inside. The massive fortress shook as its own power grid overloaded. Emergency klaxons blared throughout the station as systems failed in cascade patterns. The great cannon, designed to destroy planets, began turning its energy inward, melting through the platform's superstructure. But that wasn't the end of their plan, Zielmoth continued, his compound eyes reflecting something that might have been wonder. As our station tore itself apart, something impossible happened. Instead of pressing their attack or retreating to a safe distance, the human fleet moved closer to the dying fortress. Ships that had been firing on the platform moments before began launching boarding shuttles and rescue pods. Human Marine Commander Ye Jin led boarding parties through the hull breaches, Zielmoth said, his voice filled with disbelief even now. But they weren't trying to capture the station or secure our weapons. They were evacuating our personnel, loading our wounded onto their ships while the fortress died around us. Commander Ye Jin moved through the collapsing station with teams of human marines who seemed more like rescue workers than soldiers. They set up medical stations in damaged corridors, carried wounded Vakthari to evacuation points, and coordinated with anyone who could help save lives. I confronted Ye Jin in the medical bay, where she was treating our casualties alongside her own wounded, Zielmoth recalled. Human medics were giving blood transfusions to Vakthari soldiers who had been trying to kill them minutes before. I demanded to know why they were saving us. Ye Jin looked up from a wounded Vakthari engineer she was treating, her human eyes showing exhaustion and something else, a sadness that seemed to encompass the entire war. She looked at me with those strange human eyes and said, "Because someone has to survive to remember that this could have been avoided," Zielmoth quoted. Not avoided through surrender or defeat, but through understanding, through choosing not to fight in the first place. The evacuation continued for 3 hours as the Zerion defense platform slowly tore itself apart. Human ships formed evacuation corridors, using their own hulls as shields to protect rescue shuttles from falling debris. Pilots who had been enemies minutes before worked together to save every life they could. The platform's destruction took 3 hours, Zielmoth said. In that time, human forces evacuated 18,000 Vakthari civilians and military personnel. They lost 30 ships and 4,000 soldiers saving their enemies. The final explosion of the Zerion defense platform lit up the entire system. The fortress that had taken 50 years to build was gone in seconds, but almost everyone aboard had survived. They were now refugees aboard human vessels, being treated with a kindness that defied everything they thought they knew about war. I realized then that humans don't just fight, they redeem, Zielmoth concluded. Even their victories are forms of mercy. They could have let us die with our fortress, but they chose to save us instead. They turned our defeat into a lesson about the value of life itself. The tribunal recorder's sensors detected something remarkable in Zielmoth's biometric patterns. The stress and fear were still there, but underneath was something else. Grudging respect that had transformed into something approaching reverence. The humans hadn't just defeated the Vakthari Empire. They had shown them a different way to think about conflict, victory, and what it meant to be truly strong. The tribunal chamber fell silent as Zielmoth gathered his thoughts for the final testimony. His scarred exoskeleton gleamed under the harsh lights, each mark telling a story of battles fought and losses endured. The weight of everything he had witnessed pressed down on him like the gravity of a dying star. After the Zerion battle, I was taken to a human medical facility on Station Harmony, he began, his voice carrying a strange mixture of confusion and wonder. I expected interrogation chambers, torture devices, isolation cells, the usual fate of high-ranking war prisoners. Instead, I found myself in what humans call a hospital. Station Harmony was nothing like the sterile military facilities Zielmoth had imagined. Gardens grew in transparent domes, their green plants filtering the recycled air. Children played in corridors while their parents worked. The walls were painted in soft colors, and natural light from the nearby star streamed through massive observation windows. I was treated by Dr. Minho, who had lost his own family in our attacks on the outer colonies, Zielmoth continued. I didn't know this at first. He appeared at my bedside every morning at precisely 800, checking my injuries, adjusting my nutrition supplements, ensuring my comfort. Dr. Minho was a small, quiet man who worked with gentle efficiency. He spoke to Zielmoth in broken Vakthari, apologizing for his poor pronunciation while explaining each medical procedure. When the alien commander's wounds became infected due to species incompatibility with human antibiotics, Minho spent sleepless nights researching alternatives. He never mentioned his loss, Zielmoth said, his mandibles clicking with something. That might have been shame. Every day for 2 months he treated me with kindness. He brought me books about human culture, showed me pictures of Earth, even taught me to play a human game called chess. The truth came out by accident. Another patient, a human soldier recovering from combat injuries, mentioned Dr. Minho's family during a casual conversation. Wife and 2 children, killed when Vakhtari forces bombed the agricultural colony on Kepler 442b. The attack had been Zielmoth's idea, designed to disrupt human food supplies. When I finally learned the truth about his family, I asked him why. He saved me, Zielmoth recalled. This man whose family I had murdered looked at me with tired eyes and said, "Hatred is a wound that only heals when you stop feeding it." During his recovery, Zielmoth encountered other humans who challenged everything he thought he knew about his enemies. The station was a microcosm of human society, filled with people who had chosen compassion over revenge, despite suffering terrible losses. During my recovery, I met others. Zielmoth's mandibles clicked softly. Quartermaster Jun Sik, who organized supply runs to refugee camps containing both human and Vakhtari civilians. He would work 18-hour shifts loading medical supplies and food onto transport ships, never distinguishing between the species of those who would receive the aid. Jun Sik had been a merchant marine before the war, running cargo between peaceful worlds. When the conflict began, he could have stayed safe in the inner systems. Instead, he volunteered for the most dangerous supply missions, delivering aid to contested worlds where either side might shoot him down. Pilot Su Jin, who had been shot down 3 times, but still flew medical evacuation missions into contested space, Zielmoth continued. I watched her ship return from one mission with hull breaches and a dead engine, carrying 12 wounded Vakhtari soldiers who would have died without her intervention. Su Jin was barely 25, with the reflexes of a born pilot and the heart of a healer. She had volunteered for evacuation duty after losing her brother in the early battles. When asked why she risked her life for enemy wounded, she simply said that pain was the same in any language. Engineer Nam Ho, who designed better atmospheric processors for our captured worlds instead of stripping them bare, Zielmoth recalled. He could have built weapons, developed more efficient ways to exploit conquered resources. Instead, he spent his time making sure Vakhtari civilians could breathe cleaner air. Nam Ho worked in the station's engineering section, a maze of humming machinery and holographic displays. When he learned about the environmental damage on Vakhtari worlds, he began developing atmospheric processors that could repair decades of industrial pollution. His innovations would benefit both species for generations. The human I remember most was Chaplain Yunjung, Zielmoth said, his voice softening. She held religious services for all species, learned our death rituals, ensured our fallen were honored according to our traditions. I attended one of her services out of curiosity and found myself weeping for enemies I thought I hated. Chaplain Yunjung was an elderly woman who had spent her life studying comparative theology. When war refugees of different species arrived at the station, she made it her mission to understand their spiritual needs. She learned Vakhtari funeral rites, Zenthari meditation practices, and Korvan ancestor worship. When I asked her about human beliefs, she said, "We believe that consciousness is sacred regardless of its form," Zielmoth quoted. She explained that humans see the divine spark in all thinking beings, whether they have 2 legs, 4 arms, or crystalline matrices for brains. The months passed slowly. Zielmoth's physical wounds healed, but his mental transformation took longer. He began to understand that humans weren't the monsters Vakhtari propaganda had portrayed. They were a complex species capable of both terrible violence and profound mercy. I spent 6 months in human custody, Zielmoth continued. Not once was I mistreated. Not once was I denied communication with my clan. I was allowed to send messages home, to let my family know I was alive and well treated. When the war finally ended through negotiated surrender rather than mutual annihilation, prisoner exchanges began. Zielmoth expected to be loaded onto a transport ship with the other captives and sent home without ceremony. When the war ended, Captain Hyunwoo personally escorted me to the prisoner exchange, Zielmoth said. He had commanded one of the ships at Zerion, had lost friends saving our people. As I boarded the transport, he handed me a data pad containing the locations of every Vakthari burial site they had maintained during the occupation. Captain Hyunwoo was a career military officer who had seen too much death to take any pleasure in victory. The data pad contained detailed records of every Vakthari soldier who had died in human custody, complete with burial locations, ceremonial procedures followed, and personal effects preserved for families. They had honored our dead better than we honored theirs, Zielmoth admitted, his compound eyes reflecting the chamber's lights like fractured prisms. Every fallen Vakthari warrior was buried according to our traditions, their grave markers inscribed in our language, their personal belongings carefully preserved. The tribunal recorder whirred softly, processing the emotional complexity of Zielmoth's testimony. The alien commander leaned forward, his massive frame dwarfing the restraint chair. "The tribunal wants to know about human war crimes," he said, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "I have no such testimony to give. The real horror of fighting humans isn't their cruelty, it's their compassion. They could have exterminated us easily. Their technology, their tactics, their sheer determination. We never stood a chance." Zielmoth paused, his breathing apparatus cycling with mechanical precision. "Instead, they chose to save us from ourselves. They fought with precision to minimize casualties. They treated prisoners with dignity. They rebuilt what we destroyed and improved what we damaged. They fight like demons when they must, but they heal like angels when they can," he continued. "That is what makes them terrifying. Not their capacity for violence, but their refusal to abandon their humanity even in the face of ours." The recording device's lights flickered as it processed the final moments of testimony. Zielmoth sat back in his restraints, the weight of his words settling over the chamber like gravity. "The war ended not because we were defeated, but because we finally understood what we were fighting against," he concluded. "A species that views redemption as more powerful than revenge. They didn't conquer us, they converted us." His compound eyes closed for a moment, then opened to stare directly at the recording device. "That is my testimony. That is the truth about humans. They are the most dangerous species in the galaxy because they refuse to become monsters, even when facing monsters." The recording device powered down with a soft chime, its memory banks filled with a testimony that would reshape how the galaxy understood both war and peace. "They taught us that strength isn't about the ability to destroy your enemies," Zielmoth whispered into the silence. "It's about the choice to save them instead." "Freedong,"